This screencast introduces you to the urinary system, which may be found in Chapter 15 of your textbook.
This screencast was designed to achieve the following objectives. List the functions of the urinary system. List the organs of the urinary system and identify their locations. Describe the gross anatomy of the kidney. Define hydronephrosis. Describe urinary calculi. Describe the anatomy and function of the urinary bladder. Explain the clinical significance of the trigone. And compare and contrast the urethras of males and females. An author of an A&P book, not the one that you're currently using, but another one, makes the statement that one of the functions of the urinary system is to maintain the purity and constancy of our internal fluids. And I think that's a very accurate statement to describe one of the most important functions of the urinary system. The cells of our body are constantly producing waste products, such as nitrogenous wastes, urea, uric acid, ammonia. And if these substances build up to high enough levels, they will actually kill the cells and tissues and organs of the body. Also, as a byproduct of metabolism, our body cells produce different toxins. We also ingest toxins inadvertently that are at very small or trace amounts in our food, but if they are allowed to accumulate in the body, they can potentially cause severe damage and possibly death to our organs and therefore our total person. Also, we consume drugs, legal and illegal, that if they were allowed to build up to high enough levels could also become toxic. But the urinary system does a very good job of eliminating most of these potentially toxic substances from our blood. And because for the most part all of the body fluids, internal body fluids, are derived from blood, by eliminating these waste products from the blood, they also eliminate those waste products from all the other internal fluids. So in that way, the urinary system does maintain the purity and constancy of all of our internal fluids. The urinary system also plays several roles with respect to maintaining homeostasis. The urinary system maintains water balance, making sure that no more or no less water leaves the body than is gained by the body, and this is to maintain the appropriate levels of blood volume. The main determinant of blood pressure is blood volume. So if blood volume gets too high, blood pressure is going to get too high. If blood volume gets too low, blood pressure is going to get too low. So the urinary system regulates blood pressure by maintaining the appropriate water balance. Related to water balance is the level of electrolytes in the blood and other fluids of the body. Water will tend to move by osmosis following charged particles such as electrolytes. Certain electrolytes have to be of an appropriate level in the blood and the interstitial fluids in order to maintain the appropriate gradients between the extracellular fluids and the intracellular fluids so that muscles can contract and neurons can produce action potentials. The urinary system also maintains the appropriate acid-base balance in the blood and other fluids, since most fluids are derived from the blood. If you recall, the kidneys release the hormone erythropoietin, which stimulates the red bone marrow to produce red blood cells. So the urinary system also plays a role in red blood cell formation. And lastly, vitamin D is activated in the kidneys, so the urinary system also plays a vital role in calcium homeostasis. This figure is similar to the one in your book. It basically shows the organs of the urinary system. The kidneys, which are responsible for the production of urine, the ureters, which move that urine from the kidneys down to the urinary bladder. There, the urine is stored until there is an appropriate time to be eliminated from the body, and it is moved from the urinary bladder to the outside world by a short tube called the urethra. Let's start our discussion on the organs of the urinary system by focusing first on the kidneys. So the kidneys are found against the dorsal body wall. They are not found in the peritoneal cavity. They are behind or posterior to the peritoneum in what's called the retroperitoneum. They are at the level of the 12th thoracic vertebrae to about the 3rd lumbar vertebrae, and the right kidney is lower than the left kidney because of the position of the liver. The kidney is shaped like a kidney bean, and it's a little bigger than your fist. You know from the endocrine chapter that the kidney wears the adrenal gland like a hat, and at a location called the hilus, the ureters, the renal blood vessels, and also nerves that innervate the kidney are attached. The kidney is surrounded by a transparent fibrous layer called the renal capsule, and it gives the kidney a glistening-like appearance. A mass of adipose tissue surrounds the kidney and holds it in place. This fatty mass, called an adipose capsule, which surrounds the kidney, in addition to holding it in place, also does provide some protection for the kidney. In cases such as starvation, or if one has a disease where such as bulimia, where one puts oneself in such a negative energy balance that some of your visceral fat is used as a source of energy, that loss of the adipose capsule can cause the kidney to fall out of its normal position. That's a condition called ptosis, and that can put a kink in the ureters, causing urine to back up into the kidney, and that can cause a condition called hydronephrosis. This is an illustration of hydronephrosis of the left kidney caused by a kink in the ureters. This is a serious condition. The pressure put on the kidney can actually destroy the kidney and cause renal failure. The kidney is divided into regions. The outer region is called the renal cortex. Remember, cortex refers to the outer region of any organ. Deep to the renal cortex are the medullary pyramids, which make up the renal medulla, which is deep to the renal cortex. They're called medullary pyramids because they are triangular in shape, with the base or wide end facing the renal cortex and the tips facing the more internal portions of the kidney. Extending between the medullary pyramids are the renal columns, and the renal columns are just extensions of the renal cortex. Medial to the hilus is a flat basin-like cavity called the renal pelvis. In the renal pelvis, you have these cup-shaped areas called calyces, and these calyces basically collect urine as it drains from the tips of the medullary pyramids. Nephrons, which are found mainly in the renal cortex, but some in the renal medulla, produce urine, and that urine makes its way to the calyces of the renal pelvis, and then from the calyces the urine moves into the ureters. Ureters are slender muscular tubes which extend from the renal pelvis of the kidney and enter the posterior side of the urinary bladder. The ureters run behind the peritoneum, where they make a connection with the posterior aspect of the bladder. Peristalsis, with the aid of gravity, transports urine down the ureter, where it enters the bladder through uretral orifices. Solutes of urine, such as uric acid or calcium phosphate, can fall out of solution and crystallize, forming renal calculi in the ureters. You may know renal calculi simply as kidney stones. As they pass through the ureters, they can be extremely painful. Sometimes renal calculi are formed due to some underlying medical condition, but in many cases, certain individuals just are prone to forming kidney stones. Urine enters the bladder through the uretral orifices. The bladder itself is a smooth, collapsible muscular sac. Its function is to store urine until it is appropriate to void or urinate. The bladder expands as it is filled and collapses as it is emptied, with little change in internal pressure. The trigone of the urinary bladder is the area that is outlined by the two uretral orifices and the opening to the urethra. The trigone is clinically important because infections of the bladder tend to persist in this area. The urethra is a thin-walled tube that connects the bladder to the outside world. It allows urine to move from the bladder to places outside of the body. It is controlled by two muscles, and these muscles are both involved in voiding or urination. The internal urethral sphincter is composed of smooth muscle and is therefore under involuntary control. The external urethral sphincter is composed of skeletal muscle and is therefore under voluntary control. Carl will talk more about these two urethral sphincters and the role that they play in micturition, or the release of urine from the bladder. There are gender differences with respect to the urethra between males and females. In the male, the urethra is considerably longer. It's 8 inches. It extends through the entire length of the penis, through the prostate, where it makes a connection with the bladder. In males, the urethra is part of both the urinary system and the reproductive system, since it is a common passageway for both urine and sperm. The urethra in females is much shorter than the urethra in males, and it's only a passageway for urine, so it's only a part of the urinary system. Women are much more prone to developing urinary tract infections because the opening of the urethra is surrounded by the vaginal mucosa, which is more hospitable to bacteria than the skin of the penis. Also, the urethra of women, or at least the opening, I should say, is much closer to the anus in women than it is in men. And in particular, poor toiletry habits, that is wiping from back to front, can easily force germs into the urethra, which can cause a urinary tract infection. A urinary tract infection, if not treated, can spread to the bladder and eventually up the ureters to the kidneys. Now let's review the objectives of this screencast. List the functions of the urinary system. List the organs of the urinary system and identify their locations. Describe the gross anatomy of the kidney. Define hydronephrosis. Describe urinary calculi. Describe the anatomy and function of the urinary bladder. Explain the clinical significance of the trigone. And compare and contrast the urethras of males and females.
The topic of the next screencast will be the nephron.